Don't underestimate a life. Don't underestimate what God can do to you, in you, and through you. But I want to look at a few issues this morning in terms of what it is that undergirded them, what it is that motivated them. And let me tell you something, it had nothing to do with life preservation or riches. It had nothing to do with finding a career. It had nothing to do with finding a job or a happy home life. These men and women were willing to give up everything. And you and I sit here today listening to this, and this was penned to us by Luke, who was the companion to Paul. The dotted lines are fantastic. You never know until you look back in the sunset years of your life what a design God had for you, what a design God had for the church. And I think it was Will Durant, the historian, who made this comment: there is no greater drama in human record than the sight of a few Christians scorned or oppressed by a succession of emperors, bearing all trials with a fierce tenacity, multiplying quietly, but building order while the enemies generated chaos, fighting the sword with the word of God, brutality with hope, and at last defeating the strongest state that history had ever known. Caesar and Christ had met in the arena, and Christ had won. This is Will Durant, the historian. Caesar and Christ met in the arena, and Christ had won. How did that great empire ultimately come collapsing down? And the Word of God, through people like Paul and then Augustine and the rest of them, moved to change the world. I want to give you two things that undergirded them right from the beginning. It was the reality of a conviction of truth and unmitigated love. Truth and love undergirded these people. And the truth is this: convictions ungirded by love. Hear me now. Convictions ungirded by love will make the possessor of those convictions obnoxious, and the dogma he or she possesses will become repulsive. If your convictions are not sustained and supported by love, it will make your message repulsive and you yourself unattractive to the person you're trying to win. So it has to be convictions undergirded by love. If they are ungirded by love, the dogma is rejected and the person is certainly not appreciated or exalted. So, what were these convictions? My message is titled Convictions That Conquered the World. The first one is this: they saw the finger of God in all of history and Christ as its central figure. They saw the finger of God in all of history and Christ as its central figure. You know, there are many chapters in the Bible that have long historical backdrops, long historical narratives. When they come over from Egypt into the Promised Land, you've got Joshua giving them this long speech about how all of this had happened. After their enslavement, when they returned, you've got Ezra recounting all the details of how all this had happened and that they had reached this point. Here in Acts 7, at the birth of the church, you've got Stephen on the verge of being stoned to death, who goes through the whole backdrop of history. History is ultimately his story, and your heart and mine is the minor context in which that story is unfolded. Someone else made this comment: history is actually a compilation of innumerable biographies. History is actually a compilation of innumerable biographies. Our stories are locked into history, one person at a time. And for Stephen, he said to them, "You are about to kill me. You stoned the prophets. You killed them. You even killed the Holy One that God had sent. And now you're thinking of killing me." But he points out to them that the one you had killed was the one who had come to redeem and transform and save. This idea that the finger of God is in all of history and Christ is the central figure is critical in our times. See, we elect our leaders, we appoint our governments, we do all of this. And years come and go and people get disgusted with one and then they elect another. And the whole scenario keeps turning topsy-turvy, upside down. Every few years the world gets into some new mess and there are some new leaders who cause that mess. Years ago, they used to introduce me somewhere they had one line that said, "Ravi has some great influence on some world leaders." I said, "Please take that line out. First of all, it's not true. Number two, I don't want to take the blame for everything that is happening out there." Who wants to take the blame for being an influence on all the things that are happening out there? The fact of the matter is, to the early disciples, it's this: Jesus was the interpretive figure of all of history. They waited and waited and waited, and at an appointed time when he came. He is the hermeneutical principle, the interpretive principle, the point of reference to everything that transpires. Let me give you at least one reason why that is so. Existentialism. What is existentialism? It's a big word. Can I give you 2 or 3 lines just to try and make it simpler? Existentialism basically believes something like this: it's not who you are that should define what you do. What you do should define who you are. Existence precedes essence. What you do defines essentially who you are. The biblical teaching is not existential. It has existential implications, but it's an essential definition. Who you are essentially should define what you do. Who you are precedes what you do. That's why we are called human beings. We are not called human doings. Human beings do, but the being precedes the doing. And so what did the existentialists say? By your will, lift yourself up by your own bootstraps and make your choices. Or some of them will talk about it as the power of now. Do it now. Will to choose. Existence precedes essence. So the existentialist basically is driven by the now, by the moment. The traditionalist deals with the past. The Hebrew culture was a traditional culture. Have you ever seen the play Fiddler on the Roof? You hear the song? Tradition, tradition, tradition. Tradition, tradition, tradition. So for the traditionalist, it was the past. For the existentialist, it is the now. For the utopianist, which is Marxist, it's futuristic. Pie in the sky, by and by when I die. Kill 60 million now if you have to. We are moving towards that utopia. Existentialism now. Traditionalism in the past. Utopianism in the future. Jesus took the bread and broke it. Said, as often as you eat of this bread and drink of this cup, now you proclaim the Lord's death in the past until he come in the future. He took bread and broke it for the now, harking back to the past until he come in the future. For Jesus, all of time is important. not just the now, not just the past, not just the future. He is Lord of all of history.